Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Stride Gamer here, providing you with a very exciting Age of Empire 4 episode, and today I want to share with you 5 very important tips to become an expert in farming. Because at the beginning of the game, of course, you will probably largely focus on sheep and hunting, but very quickly for most of the civilization, you do need to build the mill and farms with it to make sure that you get enough food to produce more villagers, to produce soldiers. So this is critical to become an expert there. So let's dive right in. Tip number 1 is around how to build those farms very quickly, very efficiently in less clicks. So you have a mill, you're gonna create a mill. After this, you're gonna want to create the farms around it. And the bad method is probably to just do one click at a time, one villager at a time. That's gonna take you forever, right? And the placement maybe not optimal, etc. So let's avoid that. Instead, let me just delete that. When you have one or many of your villagers, what you can do is press Shift, click on the farm, and then instead of clicking on the ground, click on your mill. And that will position all of these farms in an optimal space. Look at this. Just click many times on the mill, as many times as you want. It will even go further. And with your mouse, you can direct in which direction it will go. For example, here, I put my mouse this side. I put my mouse this side. It will go this side. So you can build as many as you want just by pressing the Shift button and click on the mill instead of clicking on the ground. As you can see now, they're building them. So that's tip number 1. Now, tip number 2, when you have your mills and you have some farms, usually you want your workers to work in them. And, maybe they've been working in it, but you got attacked, so you send them to your town center, or you send them to get some stones or build something, and now you want to send them back here. You could do one by one, but that's not going to be very efficient. One great thing with Age of Empire 4 is you can select as many as you want, you click on one farm, and they will just spread themselves across all of the farms that are built. They will also actually start building all the farms if some aren't fully built yet. So that's tip number 2, just click on select all villagers, click on one farm only. Okay, now tip number 3, we're getting into the difference between the average player and the expert player. Let me show you first what we're gonna try to avoid. We have here a few people who are carrying some resources, and we have 4 of them. What I told you in tip number 1 still applies. We're going to build the mill, then we keep Shift button and click on the mill, and they're going to build a few of them. Let's observe what happened. We are now at 10,234 stones. We are still at 234, but now as you can see, they don't have, actually they still have it for now, but soon they won't have it anymore. I'll show you. And what you see is that they're building all of the farms. Nobody's working in the farms that have been built. They're just building them all. They understand that their order is building the farms, then building the mill, then all of the farms, and then start working. That's inefficient, right? Because some people could have been working. In particular, that's super inefficient because you have 4 villagers, and they're only building. They build 7 farms, and now they started to work. They lost their stones, right? A number of stones hasn't moved, and now they're gathering food. So that's definitely not optimal. We lost a lot of stones, and we lost also a lot of time. So now let's see how we can actually solve those 2 problems at the same time. We have these 4 same villagers. We're going to start doing the same way. You build your mill, then you click on the mill. We can still, if we want, build 7 or 8, but then you leave the right, you don't press Shift anymore, and you double click on the mill one last time. What it does is basically they forget about the farms. Now they focus on the mill. And when the mill is built, first of all, they dropped all their stones before they start working for the mill. And working for the mill that they are going to look for farms. If there's no farms, then they start building them. But what you can see is that now people directly walk in them. As soon as one is built, somebody walks in it. And then, so at the end, there's only one person left who's going to build this one and then walk in it. And these ones are not being built. And then when you have more villagers, you can build those ones and you'll be good. So this way, we didn't lose any of the stone and we didn't lose any time. As soon as the farm was built, somebody went in it. So that's tip number 3. Very important is when you're done placing all of your farms, you actually stop holding shift and you double click, right click on the mill. Okay, now moving to number 4. Tip number 4 is very important when you actually want to build many farms, when you have a large farm. If it's just those 7 or if it's just 4, that's not that important. But let's say you want to build a bit more than that, then it gets definitely a lot more important. Let's maybe, where do I space? Let's do it here. Is if I build like I just did before, which is I build the mill, then I press shift, click on the mill, they're all going to build all of the farms one at a time. It's a difference versus Age of Empire 2, where in Age of Empire 2, your villagers will be smart and sort of split themselves into groups to build more efficiently the farms, because these farms are very quick to build, right? You don't need, for example, 12 or 16 villagers to just build one farm. So what you want to do if you actually need to build many farms is to split your villagers into 2-3 groups, so that some will build on, for example, one side of the mill and the other group will build on the second side of the mill. This is quite important, once again, to gain a bit of time, in particular because you want to avoid all of your villagers moving to one extremity. For example, they all move that side to build this one, and then they all move that side to build this one, right? You want half of your villagers to be on this side and build all of this, and half of your villagers to be on that side and build all of this, right? So once again, I'm not talking about just if you need to build 2 or 3, but let's say, you want to do something like this. If you want to do something like this, then, walking from here to there, that's a lot of walking, right? And if we look here at those villagers, that actually what they may be doing is they will start on one side, then they will go back there, then they will go back here, then they will go back there. So that's a big loss of time. So just separate them into 2 groups of some on that side, some on this side. That was tip number 4. And tip number 5 is even more important than everything I just told you, but definitely for your expert player out there, is the first part of the tip is actually don't believe what you read. It says, for example, increase villager gathering rate for food by 15%. And when I say don't believe it, is don't think that it means right away you're going to go from 250 and you're going to add 15% to that, and that's exactly the number. Or even more important is here, when you say increase the carry capacity by 5 and their movement speed by 15, I guess here the sort of conclusion of my tip is I can understand for many people they have no idea what it means in terms of how much your capacity per minute is going to increase. But basically all those things are by 15%, by 10%, speed by 15%. It's actually a lot more complex than it seems. And why is that? Is actually a very smart element linked to those fields. If you look at those fields, they do, when you build them, they have actually unlimited food, meaning it will never run out. You won't need to rebuild it. But at the same time, the food is actually limited in terms of here, you see, for example, 70 out of 120. And the way it works is that something like this is divided into squares. as you can see, he's walking right now into this square here. And there's 12 squares for most civilization. He's walking on this square here and each of those squares has 10 food in it. So as for a normal villager in the first age, when he can carry 10, that's perfect. He's gonna do one square. As you can see, when he's done with this square, he's gonna deliver them. And those squares, they also regain food. Like the food will regrow in actually, I think it's 75 seconds, if I remember correctly. So at some point, he's gonna be able to come back here. It may also, if you have many of these things here, is actually going to gather maybe more than 10. He's gonna, for example, with this, he can carry 15, right? He may also gather it more quickly. So which means that at some point, instead of carrying this one here in the corner and maybe and you can see for this guy here, for example, it's very clear. He's only cutting the wheat into those 6 squares here. He's never actually touching these because he's smart. He's actually cutting only the ones closer to the mill, so he doesn't have to walk that far. But when you start, for example, using this one, when you increase the gathering rate, he's gonna gather these ones more quickly, and therefore they won't regrow fast enough. So he's gonna have to start touching these ones. The problem is when he starts touching these ones, then he has to walk a bit further. And what it means in practice, to give you a very concrete example, is increasing the gathering rate for food by 15% in a setup like this actually means that your production here per minute won't increase by 15%, but a bit more by 10%. And it's the same for many of those other things where you see a number, but the reality is a bit more complex than that. And therefore, it's important to actually understand some of those things, some of those mechanics, things around. They actually need to walk back. That's one of the important things. And therefore, one of the next video I'm gonna do, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, maybe subscribe so you don't miss it, is gonna be to show you exactly the gathering rates depending on each of the technology that you choose. So I'll be able to also show you which technology may be better than others. And of course, there are some civilization differences we'll cover, but even just the simple thing as, do you start by horticulture or do you start by wheelbarrow? That's what we'll cover in this next video around the impact of technology for farming. I hope you did like these 5 tips, remembering that you really want to make sure to use the shift key to build your farms, clicking on the mill, then after that releasing shift and re-clicking on the mill, remembering that you can just ask your villager to work on one farm and then they will spread themselves across many farms. And then lastly, remembering that the mechanics are actually a lot more complex than just what it seems, and in particular those numbers there, don't believe them right away. Okay, I hope you liked this video. If you did, press the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned for more Age of Empires 4 content.